First and foremost, I just want my readers to have a good time. Like, some people are just wanting to read, and honestly, that's fantastic. And if some people see, like, for example, they see the arc that Amira makes and they're like, wow, that feels really uncomfortable because that's me. Or they see another different conflict of another character in the book and they go, wow, yeah, that's me. And if they can learn from the arcs of those characters, then fantastic. My job and my sole goal as a writer is just to keep you entertained. Like, honestly, I want you to share the story that I want you to read the story that I've written and you have a good time with it. I want you to be like, oh my gosh, you talk to your friends and like, oh, this character's amazing because blah, 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 blah. Or I really love this scene because blah, 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 blah. Like, sort of the Star Wars thing. Like, people take different things out of it. Some people are like, wow, Star Wars is fantastic just because it's a really fun story. And some people really like the characters of it because they're like, wow, I really relate to this person. And some people are like, wow, the lore of this world is super in-depth and intense, and I want to dig into that. I want to provide those different avenues while I'm writing. If you're just looking for fun, fantastic. If you happen to learn something about yourself or other people around you while you're doing that, fantastic. If you really want to learn more about this world and you want to keep reading the books to learn more, fantastic. Honestly, I'm more looking just to see if I can build a connection with my audience, build a connection with my readers, because we're all people. Like, no matter what your personality or interests or goals in life are when you're reading these books, we're all people that like to read. Like, we're all people that want to be connected through these things. So, yeah, that's...
Everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have a beverage, nice warm coffee, and my guest also has a beverage as well, so we're enjoying together. And we're here to talk about Danielle's book, her story, and someone very special in her life, whose name is Dave. And that makes me happy because I'm also named Dave. And this other Dave has something that I don't have, which is a tail. And Dave is, like, maybe, probably the coolest cat in the world. But we're here to talk about Danielle's book as well. And a little bit of Dave is going to come up. So, Danielle, welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. This is my very first podcast, but I'm super excited. I'm really excited to have this fun conversation.
Your first time as a guest on a podcast?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to have a little sip of my coffee now in celebration.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to be taking periodic sips of water because I'm absolutely that type where if I get to talking too long, I do the awkward. And so I don't want to do that. And those of you who may not be able to see, so I have a cat mug currently. So if that doesn't give you a pretty solid view of what I may be like as a person.
Mm-hmm. So on your website, I'm on here and I'm loving your website. There's a picture, looks very comfy, of a nice reclining chair, a book in your hand, and a cat named Dave.
Yes.
Can you please introduce us to all things great as a cat named Dave? Because that makes me very happy inside, by the way.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So I've owned cats since, well, I haven't owned cats. My parents have owned cats, but I've been around cats since I was a toddler. And so that has pretty much been my predetermined fate that I'm going to be a cat lady in some way or form. However, Dave came about because this would have been my late high school. My parents were looking for a cat, but we ended up getting 2, which was unexpected. But this cat was just very cuddly, and I have a way for looking for cats when I'm looking at the Humane Society. So typically I will sit down on the floor and I will wait, and I will see which ones are a little more personable and which ones like to keep their distance. And the cat, Dave, that I had picked ended up sitting on my lap multiple times. So I was like, okay, this one's mine. We're good to go. Another one was picked out that my brother chose. But on the way home, we were trying to decide a name for this cat. And we were thinking sweetheart or just something adorable and cute. And then as soon as my brother, who's 2 years younger, sees this cat, he goes, no, that cat's a Dave. I'm like, no. This cat is not a Dave. So for those of you who don't know me, I have a whole lot of Daves in my family. Both of my grandpas were a Dave. My husband is a David. I have an Uncle David. It just never ends Davids. And I was like, we do not need another Dave in this family. And then against all odds and what my hopes and wishes were for that, the cat was named Dave, whether I liked it or not. So, and now he's currently living with me at my house and living his best life. Now there are 2 Davids in my house. So
let's raise a glass to Dave here.
Yes.
Dave, to all things Dave.
Yes.
Your first time as a guest on a podcast. Congratulations. You're here. Wow.
Thank
That's
you.
exciting, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was wanting to not dig too much into marketing any of my books or whatever until I had done a full trilogy first, because there are several people in my circle that are like, oh, I only like to read books when there's a definitive series done rather
Okay.
than wait as it continues and is still being written. So I decided to strike a happy medium in that the first trilogy is done and I'm currently working on the second one. So trying to keep busy.
Wow. Okay, so where did the author thing bite you like originally? How long ago? What was the thing that made you go, hang on, I'm going to be an author and I'm going to be on a podcast talking about my cat named Dave. Like, when did all that start for you?
Maybe not the podcast bit, but I'm sure the talking about my cat and my writing bit was very much a thing when I was about
Okay.
7 or 8 years old.
Oh,
So,
wow. Okay.
so what ended up happening was there was this writing contest at my school, and I decided to just give it a try. This would have been like my second grade, I think, if I remember right. But I tried it just to see how I would do. And then I realized I had a lot of fun doing it. And then I actually did win. So I was like, oh, I am actually kind of good at this. Okay. So I decided to just keep honing my craft from then onward. I'm almost 30 now. So it has been one interesting journey and one that I have liked to try and share with people because I feel bad for authors because I feel like we have kind of a different kind of art. So we have an art that we spend tens to hundreds of hours devoting to one project. And this is not to naysay any people who are painters or sculptors, anything like that, but you'll probably understand more than most, where you spend so much time on one thing. Your heart and soul, blood, sweat, tears, all the bit goes into it. And then you just let the world see it and all that entails, all the positive, all the negative, and it is scary. But because of that, I think there's this preconceived notion with people who are writers that are like, oh, you write. Oh, that's cute. That's adorable. It's like, no, we take this seriously.
Yeah.
Like, so as much as I know that when I was younger, I was a little hesitant to share. They're like, oh, you think you're going to be the next big author, aren't you? And I'm
Oh,
like,
look at you.
it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if I am or not. I'm doing it because I care about it. And people, if they genuinely like my work, fantastic. What I hope to do with my writing is to give people a place to go for a little while in a really cool place in outer space that doesn't exist currently that we know of. But it's just people need some adventure. People need some fun. They need something that's not super, super serious or doesn't have unhappy endings. Because admittedly, none of the books that I have written have unhappy endings. Like just because I personally don't like that with books that I'm reading. So I've just hopefully my audience likes what I do. So
Okay, so tell us about your genre of what you're writing in. Let's talk about that, and maybe why did you settle on that? You could write cookbooks, you could write cartoons, you could do anything, but why that genre? What is it?
it's an interesting story for a couple different reasons. One,
Okay.
because I wrote high fantasy for into my early high school because I was like, oh, and honestly, high fantasy is great. A lot of my family actually prefers reading it, but science fiction tends to be a little more trying to think of the right word. It moves a lot quicker. So because me as a person, I tend to get straight to the point. I tend to not give too much detail. I will describe things in my books, but it's not like pages upon pages because there have been several times where I would read high fantasy and I'm just like, get on with it. So as beautiful as the story would be, I was just so anxious to keep it moving. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't think high fantasy is going to be it for me when it comes to writing anymore. And then I remembered that like I absolutely love Star Wars. Absolutely love it. Was literally raised on it. So, and I was like, I really like the story for that. So maybe instead of this elementals idea that I had rolling around in my head for high school, I was like, well, what if I just put it in outer space? What about that? What if I do a mix of Star Wars and I do Star Trek and I do a little bit of Avatar Last Airbender thrown into the mix? And and then the Tides of the Universe series came out of it. And I've been very proud of it and how it's come out. And the people that have read it, it's interesting because the people who have read it, I think they did it to me as a favor on the first couple rounds. Or just like, I don't read science fiction, but I really liked this book and I want to read the next one because it doesn't read like a hard science fiction book. It reads like soft science fiction. So basically, it's a science fiction background with a fantasy story at the forefront. And I think that's what people like about it. And they have talked about, I've had a couple been like, wow, this would honestly be a really good Netflix series just because it moves so quickly and there's so much action in it and it just doesn't stop. So it's like, well, honestly, huge compliment. But I'm hoping that other people can also get a hold of the books and they can fall in love with the universe just like I have and hopefully like the characters as much as I have. And yeah.
You mentioned two words that's making my wife shake her head when she listens to this back and forth, like, oh no, here goes Dave. Here goes Dave. You did it. Not the cat Dave, but this Dave. Uh-huh. You said two words, Star Trek. And I just had recently on my podcast, Adam Nimoy, whose dad is Leonard Nimoy from the original Star Trek.
That is amazing. Yeah,
he came on to write a book about his dad and what it was like growing up. Seeing his dad on set when he was a little boy. He had his dad sign a headshot of Spock in character, and Spock talked to him, not his dad in the moment, because he was in the makeup chair. Mm-hmm. He was like, that's enough, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, that's Spock. That's not my dad, right? Mm-hmm. Really interesting stories. So when you said Star Trek, I know my wife's going to be like, oh, here he goes.
Oh boy.
But like, I love that creative world of, where we can just go anywhere, like beyond and all that, all that great stuff we talk about Star Trek. But I just love that a book can take us somewhere special like that and help us to kind of escape and, and we can find ourselves in there in the book as we read. How important is it for you to build that spot for a reader to feel like they're part of the story and they feel like they have a place inside the story? How important is that for you as a writer?
It's interesting because when you are writing, you typically are writing with your experience as a human being in mind. So you may not consciously be planning on doing it, but it comes out anyway. In a lot of the various characters that I have, I tried to deliberately have a very diverse cast of characters, both with personality, background. Now, of course, I could say race, but a lot of them are alien species race, but same connections. Yeah. But I have one character who is a mom whose partner left her. You have that trauma that she has to deal with. You have a character who's just trying to do good in the world by using their talent with cooking to get people close together and get them to be friends. You have somebody who is just so afraid of not being able to reach their own potential that they kind of settle on the back and they don't take risks and they don't reach for the stars, as it were. They really just they want to be content with the bare minimum because they're afraid of failure. So it's a lot of these different themes that each of these characters deal with, that if you're a writer, it just comes out because it's either something you've personally had to experience or you've seen somebody had to experience it. Or again, like being people is complicated. Being people is hard. But being people is also what makes our experience so special. So
when you write, do you have elements of yourself in your characters, or is there a specific character that resembles you most?
Oh boy. So yes and no. Okay. So I try not ever to have one character who's 100% me, partly because if people don't like that character, then I can't feel personally attacked. But Admira, the main character of the story, the admiral that has been sent out through her academy to do a trial to become she's captain in this book, to become an admiral. She is, she has a lot of the traits that I had in high school, which was something so she is very easily anxious. She is very easily worried. She's constantly making sure she's trying to do like the best thing that she can with her potential. She's trying to just do her best, but at the same time, she absolutely loses her temper a couple times just because of under the weight of the story that's happening to her at that precise moment. But several of the other characters have like little glimpses of me, but they're also little glimpses of people that I know, or fusions of just different people and ideas and just things I wanted to explore in a person. So the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
That's for sure.
Have you had people in your life that read your books and go, hey, Danielle, page 63, that sounds a lot like me? Like, is there a little piece of me in this book? Like, do you get any of that kind of interesting queries from your friends and family at all when they see your stuff?
Not generally, except one.
Oh,
One.
see, I love that. Okay.
And that was the character Rithian, who shows up a little later in the book. So he was somebody who was friends with her in the academy. They were phenomenal together. They had great working chemistry. They were able to work a lot of problems together, and they just do well together as people. And my husband was reading it, and he, wait, you based that character off me, didn't you? And I said, partly yes. Partly yes. Not entirely. The chemistry, the relationship between the both of them, because my husband and I were actually friends before we got together. So it's like, yes, that absolutely was the basis of that. So, yes.
Before we hit record, you mentioned that Dave has some attitude along with his tail. Do you find inspiration in even like Dave and things like that around you, animals and people around you, and just interactions? Do they kind of feed their way into what you write? Because like you mentioned, he's got character, he's got sass, he's everything. So
Right.
Do you see stuff like that having an impact and influencing you in any way?
Not too much in my writing. I don't think now. So Dave did have some inspiration for one of the characters, not necessarily the attitude, but there is a race of aliens who are not so thinly veiled, basically gigantic bipedal cats. So you have, and each of those Keteraids that she comes across have different personalities, but one of them is a bit more how I would picture my cat. But it wasn't intentional. But now that you point it out, I'm like, well, actually, I think you may be right. I do believe there's one specific character in the book. Just in case you haven't read it before or you intend to read it, it actually might be a little bit of a spoiler if I tell you who it is.
Okay,
So
we won't.
keep it quiet.
No. Yeah.
But
look for Dave somewhere in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I love it because we just want to honor Dave. Like again, the fact that your cat's name is Dave makes me so happy. So I want to talk about Dave as much as possible in our conversation. Okay, so your starting point for the book. Did you have like all of your characters kind of fleshed out already? You knew kind of the story plot before you started writing, or were you kind of like this was happening in the moment for you as you're writing? You're like, oh, we're going this direction now. Okay, I'll just keep writing. Oh, now we're going this direction. Like, how did you plan this out? How did it actually unfold for you in the writing process?
That is a fantastic question because the answer is yes and no. So typically when I've talked with other authors in the past, they typically have one nugget of information that they've really latched onto. And they're like, I want to make an idea around this. Now, for my writers in the audience, a lot of what you may have already heard of, you need to ask the question, what if? Like, what if this scenario? And then that can help you build on the other what ifs that should happen in your book. So, for example, my what if was, what if elementals were in space? Like, because all of the elemental stories that I'd read are either high fantasy or some contemporary fiction. So it's like, okay, like, I don't think there's been a whole lot of, and not to say that space magic as a subgenre isn't a thing, but elemental specifically, I don't think has been addressed. So I was like, okay, so that would be really cool. And I'm going to be completely honest with you that the main character, Admira, her design was actually based off of a character that I absolutely adore in a Disney movie. So for those of you who have seen the less popular Treasure Planet that came out in the early 2000s, Admira's design, at least in part, is based off of Captain Amelia. Like, I remember when I was younger, I looked at her, I was like, wow, she is so cool. She has all of her stuff together. Like, just as people pay attention to her, like, just, whoop, I just thought she was really, 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 really cool. So I was like, okay, so I'll do that. And then obviously change your personality because I'm not going to do that. Like, if you are a writer, just be careful to try and not directly copy anybody else's characters unless it's a fan fiction that has been explicitly said it's a fan fiction. just because I think you're kind of robbing yourself if you don't practice your own mental flexibility of being able to adapt characters to what your story and what your personal needs and wants are for it. So just a word to the wise. But yeah, the initial thought was elementals in space because, ooh, that sounds cool. And then, ooh, I really like this character, but I'm going to change her a little bit so that it does this. Ooh, wait a minute. This character would be a really good foil to her because their personalities are very different. Ooh, this character would be really cool because blah, 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 blah. And then it starts coming together. And then so my process, as it were, when you have your initial idea, is that I will typically go on walks constantly. Now, I go on walks constantly anyway, but usually I will stick my earbuds in and I will just start going because I need to let these ideas sink in. And then usually other ideas will continue to pop up for specific events. And then once I feel like I have enough events going on, I'll start writing a very tentative outline, which will go through several iterations before I feel comfortable, with actually committing them to paper for a first draft. So some people are pantsers and some people are plotters, and that's completely fine either way. For me, I am a plotter. I like to know almost exactly like the main events that are going to happen. However, what I do leave up to interpretation, and I'm really glad that you brought this up, Dave, is that characters do their own thing. And you really don't expect it to. When you have a character that is fleshed out enough to be their own personality, you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting you to do that, but I really like where this is going. So we're going to chase that thread for a little bit. And so one of my really, really intense conversations that happens in my second book, which is Tides of the Universe, The Raging Storm. The first one is The Perfect Storm. She has this really deep, gutting heart-to-heart with somebody that she did not get along with, at all. And it happened because I let this character be this character. And so honestly, it's one of my favorite scenes in the book. So really? Just because of how intense it ended up coming out to be, because the character that she didn't get along with had an arc of their own and was able to share what they had learned from their arc to her for something that was happening in kind of a situation in that he was dealing with this situation years ago, and now she's having to deal with something similar now. And so he's like, you're going to listen to me right now. Here's what's going on. And then it's just that conversation was, I was so glad that it ended up coming to paper.
That sounds satisfying for you as an author, right?
It was. And even for plotters, you do need to allow some wiggle room. I am very much the person who likes to schedule out my day, pretty consistently of okay, I'm going to write here. I'm going to work here. I'm going to go do this errand. I'm going to do this. And I get a lot of accomplishment from that. But writing in and of itself is a more creative endeavor, obviously, but you have to be flexible. And that includes the constructive criticism process that comes after that with beta readers and editors. But so it's just this, it's fantastic, honestly, how stories even come to fruition because they're such nebulous things, but then they become this cohesive thing when it becomes a printed book or an ebook or an audiobook. And you can look at that physical thing that you've been able to accomplish and go, wow, I did that.
Yeah.
I did that all by myself. But yeah, it is a great sense of accomplishment to be able to do that. Honestly, even if you don't get to the point of publishing it, because I have several books that I haven't published, but I can look back on them and go, wow, I took all the time and energy to do that. And I'm proud of myself for that. So, yeah, sorry, I got off a bit of
Yeah, no, I like this. It seems kind of like, as you're explaining it, I'm picturing an author who writes kind of in the format of a train on a track. You kind of have to go where the track goes. So you're kind of tied to that. You can't just veer off and go any direction. You kind of follow the track. Compared to an author that's more like a sailboat, who kind of puts up a sail and let's see where we end up, right? We're a hot air balloon. I'm just going to go where we go. I kind of want to go that way, but I might end up over there. But we're making progress. It's just hard to measure, because we're just kind of all over. So and in that situation, which one are you?
So when it comes to that, actually, I feel like the best situation is actually me being in a car. Because there are so many different roads that are already paved, or some that, I maybe didn't notice on one direction. I may be going straight down on a highway, but, wait a minute, there's this detour that actually looks really interesting and I probably should go ahead and take that. But then worst case scenario, and this is something that writers, please, 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 if you feel like that isn't working, you are allowed to reverse and go back another direction. It is, honestly, I understand what it feels like when you've been working 50 to 100 to 150 pages at least into a book and you're like, this isn't clicking. Like, I need to start over. Like, I had to do that with my very first book with The Perfect Storm. I had to redo it completely because it was not working. But in the end, I feel like this book that I have published and has gotten really good reviews and people have said, yes, this honestly was phenomenal. I want to read the second one. That is, I guess I want you to do the best you can do, even at the risk of there being a lot of rework. Because if I had continued to go down on that detour and force my way to a road that wasn't there, it would absolutely show up later with people going, I mean, it was just okay. So chances are, if you as the author feel like something isn't working, your audience is going to tell too. So don't be afraid to go change things up or go down a different road or reverse or like whatever you feel the need is right. And if there are times where you need to get where you're working on your draft and you're just like, I have no idea, put it away for a little bit. It's okay. It's not going to disintegrate while you look away from it. It's going to still be there. So I would recommend, like, my thing is going on walks. Some people prefer to play piano. Some people prefer to just have a cup of coffee while they're staring at the birds and just listening and just having those sounds sink into their soul. Like, everybody is different, but do yourself a favor. Even if it hurts, if you feel like you're hitting a roadblock, either take a break or go a completely different direction because your book will be better for it. I promise you.
That's good advice. It's great advice. So my podcast is called Living the Next Chapter, obviously, and shameless plug now inserted into the podcast. As you're writing the book, how are you growing? How are you changing? How are you different as a person as you write? Because you start as one person. And when I do music. So I start as one person when I start a project. And then at the end of it, I've learned new things. I have new approaches. I've had new thoughts, new creativity, all in the process. And now at the end result is I have a song, but I also have a new skill set or a new appreciation. There's something different about me in the process. So how are you different as you've been writing through these books? What's changed for you?
I've noticed a couple different things as I get done writing these books. So the first book took about 7 to 8 years to really come to fruition.
Wow.
So that in and of itself, like, I literally grew up. So it didn't get published until, I believe, 2020. So that was obviously a hot second since high school, but also like past college. Like, it took a really long time for me to feel confident enough to do that. And the confidence issues that Admira deals with was a direct reflection of what I was personally dealing with. Mm-hmm. But one of the whole points of the story is you push on because you have to. You push on because you're doing a disservice to yourself if you don't. You push on because, at least in the situation of the book, people are looking to you to protect them. And like, it's no matter what you do to stay in that safe bubble, life is gonna pop that bubble constantly. There is no such thing as a safe bubble. So at that point, you might as well do what you're going to do. You're going to march to the beat of your own drum. You're going to follow your own moral compass, and you're going to do what you need to do what you can to give good in the world, whatever that is. So with that, I would say that was the big change, the biggest change, I guess, in personality from me from high school to now, which is I'm going to unabashedly be myself. And if I make a mistake, then so be it. I'll apologize and learn from it. And I will try my darndest not to do it again. But at the same time, I also know that I can't continue to just stay on the sidelines of my own life. That's a disservice to myself and everybody else around me. So I would say that's the biggest one. I have noticed as the books have gone on, it's not necessarily that I have changed, but I feel like my perception of people has changed. Because when you're dealing with so many different types of characters, you're dealing with so many different personalities. as a writer, you need to be so understanding of how people work and what motivates them so that you can understand your character, so you can write them in a more understanding and compassionate way. So I may have a character who's an absolute stinker, like I am, like there is in book 1, but then still have compassion for them by the end of the day.
Okay, that makes sense. I like it. As you write then as well, you're growing, you're changing. What is kind of your hope for your readers? Do you want them to kind of grow with the books as well? And you want them to kind of read through these and they're going to be different in the process of reading your books? What's your big wish for the readers?
First and foremost, I just want my readers to have a good time. Like some people are just wanting to read. And honestly, that's fantastic. And if some people see, like, for example, they see the arc that Admira makes and they're like, wow, that feels really uncomfortable because that's me. Or they see another different conflict of another character in the book and they go, wow, yeah, that's me. And if they can learn from the arcs of those characters, then fantastic. My job and my sole goal as a writer is just to keep you entertained. Like, honestly, I want you to share the story that I want you to read the story that I've written and you have a good time with it. I want you to be like, oh my gosh, you talk to your friends and like, oh, this character's amazing because blah, 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 blah. Or I really love this scene because blah, 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 blah. Like, sort of the Star Wars thing. Like, people take different things out of it. Some people are like, wow, Star Wars is fantastic just because it's a really fun story. And some people really like the characters of it because they're like, wow, I really relate to this person. And some people are like, wow, the lore of this world is super in-depth and intense. And I want to dig into that. I want to provide those different avenues while I'm writing of, if you're just looking for fun, fantastic. If you happen to learn something about yourself or other people around you while you're doing that, fantastic. If you really want to learn more about this world and you want to keep reading the books to learn more, fantastic. Like, I just, honestly, I'm more looking just to see if I can build a connection with my audience, build a connection with my readers, because we're all people. Like, no matter what your personality or interests or goals in life are when you're reading these books, we're all people that like to read. Like, we're all people that want to be connected through these things. So, yeah, I'm
glad that you said we're all people, because my next question for you was, we have authors listening to this, Danielle. They're like baby steps into this. They've done like 2 words on a piece of paper. They dream of being where you are, right? That's their goal, is they want to be a published author. They want to get to where you are. And they kind of look at you and hear you talk on this podcast, and it just seems like everything's good for you. Like, you're in a good spot. Doesn't sound like you're struggling as an author. Doesn't sound like it's hard for you now. It sounds like it's relatively easy compared to a brand new author. Doesn't know what they're doing. Is there anything that you struggle with as an author that kind of would help us as a new author to go, okay, so you don't have to be perfect to be a published author. Like, there's things that Danielle's still working through, and a challenge for you still to this date that you still work through when you sit down to write?
When I was first writing, I was a horrific perfectionist. You cannot be an author and a perfectionist at the same time. There is no book on this earth that is perfect. Literally none. You could always look at a book and go, that could have been written a little better, or, ooh, what if they'd done this completely different plot line, or they really went into that. So get rid of that idea right now. You are never going to write the perfect book, because the perfect book does not exist. You need to write the perfect book for you. So don't try. And honestly, this was my thing. It's like, I didn't necessarily want to cater to who I thought my audience was, because my audience, at least, are just people who are trying to be good people who also have a really interesting interest in sci-fi, who like Star Wars like I do, who like Avatar: Last Airbender, who like Star Trek, who are probably gamers like me, who like to go on walks and listen to video game music or classical music on occasion. It's just a fascinating thing, because I look back on it now, like, and being so lost and being like, where do I even start with all this? What is my first stepping stone at all? And to that, really, the big thing is practice. Even if it's just a couple hundred words, and it doesn't even have to be every day. That was another thing that I I drilled it into my own head where I was like, I need to write every single day if I'm going to be considered an author. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have to be a Stephen King who kicks out 5,000 words a day. You don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was, there was an article that I was reading not long ago where it was talking about authors and their word counts. And yeah, there was one person who was like, yeah, I'll do like 500 words a day. And I was just like, excuse me? 500 words a day, that's it? And then there were others who were like, it comes and goes. Like, I don't have a daily word count. And I was just like, oh, that's allowed?
Wait a minute.
So there is no perfect way to be an author because there are no perfect books and there are no perfect storylines. And it's this illusion that you have to create perfection in art. Art isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be admired. It's meant to be critiqued. It's meant to be looked at. So I really don't want people to be like me when I first started out and feeling so overwhelmed at the perfect way to do things that you just didn't even start at all.
Yeah. So if I summarize this, perfection is like Dave the cat chasing his own tail.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Round and around and around and around. You'll never really be satisfied. You're always going to be chasing yourself. Yeah.
Yep.
And again, another Dave reference, because I need that. I need more Dave the cat references in our conversation. I want to honor Dave and make sure that he feels included in our conversation, because he's probably kind of wishing he had his own podcast. Maybe that's an idea. Dave needs his own podcast. Dave the cat podcast.
Oh my gosh.
Come on.
He is very photogenic. So that absolutely would be something to consider with the podcast. It's just like, all right, Dave, what do you think of this scene right here? Meow. I'm like, okay, very insightful. Yes. All right. Now, what do you think about this? What do you think? What should we do here? Okay.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. We're good. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought.
He's not that vocal of a cat, except in the mornings. And I'm sure about other cat owners or people who at least have some knowledge of cats will understand when it is time to eat, it is time to eat or they're going to die. If you do not feed them within 5 minutes of you cracking open the door and they're right there and they're like, hey, feed me right now. Feed me right now.
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to stop. Feed me. Yeah. And it's just,
I get it. Okay. So again, you have your current series out. You're continuing to write.
Yes.
So again, shameless plug for the name of my show, Living the Next Chapter. What is your next chapter, Danielle? What's coming up for you? What's coming down the road? How are you living this next chapter?
I am going to keep doing what I'm doing, but my big part now, and this is something else for my writers, you never 100% know what you're doing. I don't care who you are, you do not ever 100% know what you're doing. Because something else, now that we are in this digital age and we are, that a lot of people are leaning away from traditional publishing and more self-publishing or what have you, you need to be really good at marketing. And I can admit, I am not good at it. That is what I am working on right now. This is why I'm taking shots in the dark and applying for podcasts. This is why I'm starting to get in touch with people like, hey, can you make some promotional images so I could maybe start making some ads? This is me continuing to try and reach the people that I know want to read my book because I want to give them more books to read that I know they're genuinely going to enjoy. I want to give them books that are fast-paced, have good heart, great characters, but also aren't this long. They're not hundreds upon hundreds of pages. And this is not knocking you if you do. Please don't misunderstand that. I just prefer quick. I prefer snippy. I prefer heart. I prefer solid found families. I prefer the whole space magic genre, swords in space, what have you. I just want to find my people. And I'm trying really hard to learn the best ways to find my people. So that is my next chapter. Is I'm continuing to write, sure. And actually, since y'all have been so patient with listening and I really want to connect with you all, so if you're interested, on my website, there is a place where you can email me and I can give you a prologue to my first chapter and you can get sent out to my newsletter. But you all are going to be the very first to know the title of book 4 for the next series. Dun. So we have Tides of the Universe is the series as a whole. The first trilogy is the Lightning Trilogy, which has the Perfect Storm, the Raging Storm, and the Perfect Storm. Wait, Into the Storm, I'm sorry. The Storm is the first one, then the Raging Storm, then the Perfect Storm. And then the first book of the second trilogy is going to be called Groundbreaker.
So we're breaking ground with that announcement as well.
Mhm.
Right.
And I'm so excited. So I actually worked on it a bit this morning, and I was thinking about the podcast later. I'm like, I'm so excited. Should I tell them? Should I? I'm gonna tell them. I'm gonna tell them about it. So,
Did you ask Dave for permission to share that at all? Like, as your agent? Like, did we break confidence with Dave? I hope not.
don't tell him.
Okay.
Actually, talk to him first.
Just feed him and he'll be distracted.
Exactly. I'll give him a treat later for me to
Okay,
go.
you mentioned your website. I'm on it. I love your website, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Tell everybody about the website. Where do we go? All that great information. You know what we do here at the end. But where do we go and how do we connect?
So my author page is at danielleiceauthor.com. And then you'll go to that newsletter tab if you're curious about getting in touch and getting that prologue chapter.
I'm clicking it right now.
There
it is.
If you are interested in getting and purchasing the books, they are at least right now only available on Amazon. I'm still trying to work about getting them onto other platforms. But if you look up Tides of the Universe and then look up the title that it is right now, or for each of the books. So Tides of the Universe Into the Storm is the first one. Tides of the Universe The Raging Storm is the second one. Tides of the Universe The Perfect Storm is the third one. So if you're interested in purchasing those on Amazon, they are available as a paperback and an ebook. And I'm trying to figure out audiobook at the moment. So,
wow.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. But I'm trying really hard just to get people to see what this is and hopefully get people more of the stories that they can connect with and that they really enjoy reading and that they can go, wow, when's the next one?
I love it. When I look at the covers for the books, who did that for you? Those are beautiful, by the way.
I have gone through 3 different people for each single one of those books. So I'm still trying to figure out my best person, honestly.
Okay, they're beautiful.
But yeah. For authors, just so you know, you really probably the book cover is the very first thing that people are going to see.
Yeah.
So, but you don't have to break the bank to have a good cover. So, the website that I had gone to was, Get Covers, and they charge about $35 for a really high quality book cover, which was the third book. So that was, So
That's
just something to consider. Like, you don't have to shell out thousands upon thousands of dollars for you to have a very, very good front cover.
Are you allowed to use the cover on promotion stuff and like your Instagram and all that other stuff to promote the book? Do you own the rights to the cover then? Okay.
Yes. So it's like, I do like to give credit where credit's due, but I am allowed to be like, hey, here are the covers. Enjoy. Please, please read my book. Pretty please.
It's a good point. It doesn't come up often. Doesn't come up often in our conversation. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And then for you, from an author's perspective, you mentioned reviews. What for you is a meaningful review? What helps you as an author to hear?
Honestly, so are we talking like Amazon reviews, or are we talking about just general reviews?
Just any review from a reader. What really helps you to hear back from the reader?
Honestly, partly authors are still people in that we need encouragement. If you liked the book, please tell us. Whether that's leaving a review on Amazon or getting in touch with me through the email on my website just to say, wow, I really enjoyed it and I want to follow you and get to know more of your books and your work more. That is the best Christmas gift you could give any author any day of the year. Is just validation and a review on Amazon, just because it helps boost other people also being able to find it. So when it comes to more constructive criticism, which is what generally happens in the first several rounds of me editing my book, it's more specific and actionable feedback. So if you're looking for beta readers or editors, you need somebody who's going to be honest with you, not be rude to you. Who's going to be like, wow, this book was terrible. But they don't tell you why they thought it was terrible. It's like, well, I like this character, and you said that they're like this, and they've been behaving like this, but they did this completely different, unexpected thing that just made no sense. That's the sort of feedback you're looking for. You're looking for things you can fix, if it is something you can fix. And now here's one other thing. My dear, sweet, lovely writers out there, not everyone is going to like your book, and that's okay. Not everybody is going to like the genre that you write. Not everybody is going to like your writing style, and that is perfectly fine. you just move on to the next person. You move on to the person who was like, wow, that actually was really, really good. And they're like, oh, why, thank you. I spent a lot of time on it. And I'm hoping to do that for another book if you're writing a series or what have you. Mm-hmm.
Good. Danielle, thank you so much. And again, my thanks to Dave for allowing us to have time in your calendar away from Dave to allow you to be here with us. So thank you, Dave. And again, I'm excited to have you come back in the future.
I would love that more than anything, honestly.
Okay, because you're so fun to talk to.
Oh, thank you.
And there's a lot of things coming up for you that I'd love to get a kind of a touch base in the future and hear and celebrate with you on the next thing. Because it just doesn't seem like there's an end to this conversation. So let's have you back in the future. Okay.
Yes, I could talk about my books and or just tips for new writers like all day, because I did have to start from scratch. I didn't have anybody who could mentor me or whatever. So I do understand what it's like to literally start out at the bottom and then figure it out. So
you brought us lots of value. Lots of value, Danielle. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I very much appreciate it.
Awesome. For a first-time guest, you hit it out of the park. Well done.
Woo-hoo,
do more of this. You talk about promo. This is a great way to promote your book because now we have a connection with you. We hear your voice in our head. And when we see your book on a shelf or on a website, we're like, oh, that's Danielle Ice. I know that. I heard her. So it's a nice bond between the reader and the author. So do more of this. You're great at this.
All right. Absolutely. I certainly hope to do that. And I hope to figure out I guess I should know there's no magic formula for marketing, but figure out what works for me in my books. And so I can just get more people into my circle. So
there you go. I love it. Everybody, all the information as always in the show notes. Make sure you go over and buy all of the books, and then also buy books for other people in your life that you know are going to love it based on this conversation, and just send them to them. Just buy lots of books is basically my whole hope for you as a listener, that you're going to do this and help support another great author. Yeah. So Danielle, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much. And real quick, so I actually did have somebody who purchased one of my books and then gave it to one of their work colleagues. And they were like, wow, this is actually one of the best books I've ever read. I'm not going to lie. So I was like, nice. Huge compliment to me. But yes, so if anybody's even remotely interested in science fiction, feel free to throw it at them. Just to see what they think.
I love it. Danielle, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
All right. Thank you so much. You have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for listening all the way to the end of the podcast. That's a big signal to all of the players, the YouTubes, the Apples, the Spotifys, that you found value in this episode of Living the Next Chapter. Just by you listening to the end, you just sent a huge bat signal out to the app saying this was a great podcast, a great conversation. So you listening to this point, you've done your job. I have one more ask of you. If you know anyone that would benefit from this conversation, would you share this episode with them? Would you just send them a message, send them the episode, tell them about this episode, tell them to livinginthenextchapter.com to get all the information about the podcast. Could you do that for me? Because the more people that hear this message, this episode, the better. I want to support these amazing authors. And I know you do as well. So sharing this episode really helps. And I appreciate you. See you on the next episode. And thank you for listening to Living the Next Chapter.